Let me let him go by. You know what? We're in a Supra for a reason, bro. Leave him in the fucking dust, bro. Today we're in a 2021 Toyota GR Supra, and it's definitely a bit of a polarizing car. I'm really excited to finally check it out because I'm a bit of a Bimmer boy, and this is kind of a BMW, especially out here on some wide open canyon roads. But before I start the video, I want to say, make sure that if you like this content to hit the like button, subscribe so I can make more videos like this happen. And without further ado, let's get the Supra on the road and let's discuss how I feel about it as an otherwise BMW fan. So setting off here in the Supra, it immediately feels like a BMW. And I'm not necessarily sure if that's a good or bad thing. You have your basic BMW treatments. The mirrors are straight off of a BMW. Your infotainment is effectively a BMW iDriving system, just with some Toyota branding and, verbiage instead of the word BMW anywhere. Your steering wheel is a BMW steering wheel. Unfortunately, it's a non-M Sport steering wheel, which is kind of a letdown considering this is obviously the equivalent level of an M Performance vehicle, almost an M vehicle, but certainly like an M Performance level vehicle, and those always come with M steering wheels. So you notice those little things, good or bad. You have a head-up display straight off of a BMW, and more than that, it feels very much so like a BMW Z4. Now, I haven't even driven the latest generation of Z4, which this car shares a chassis with, and I still feel like I'm in a Z4. If my eyes were closed the second I got in this car, I'd be like, I'm in a Z4. It's that Roadster feeling. You sit low and further back, and the chassis closer to the rear axle, which is a great sensation overall. It's very similar to the sensation you'd feel in the similar price range with the F-Type, kind of with the Cayman, although that's a mid-engine vehicle, but even the kind of same sensation you'd feel in, say, a Ferrari 812. You're sitting closer to that rear axle, you have a longer bonnet, and despite this car being a bit smaller, it still gives you that general sensation. Now, you have the tried and true B58 engine, and in fact, here for 2021, they've actually updated a couple components within it. So it has a slightly larger turbo and a separate exhaust manifold, something like that, and now produces 382 horsepower and 368 pound-feet of torque. So you have a little bit of a power increase from the 2020, the launch model year cars. I'm not gonna say that the power is super noticeable because I haven't even driven the 2020, first of all. And second of all, a lot of these cars claim certain, a little squirrel. A lot of these cars claim certain horsepower numbers. Sometimes they're, a lot of the times, in fact, when it comes to brands like BMW, they're kind of underselling you on power. Wouldn't be surprised if a car like this was making closer to 400, even over 400 horsepower at the crank. So power isn't the big difference. What the bigger difference is they finally have added a couple braces and, up front in the engine bay that were for some reason absent in 2020. They were present in the 2020 Z4, but again, now they're present here in the Supra. So you get a little bit more of that technical handling capability within a 2021 Supra, and they've slightly adjusted the EPS system. Again, I can't directly compare it to the 2020 model, but I can say that it's, first of all, pretty good for an EPS system, especially in this price range, and it's miles above the system in my 2018 3 Series. A 3-liter 6-cylinder Supra starts at about 51 grand, which is honestly a pretty solid value proposition for what you're getting. And this car is, as equipped, is about 54, 55 grand. So again, not a tremendously expensive car in today's day and age. It is a solid $10,000 less, or about $9,000 less than the starting price on a 718 Cayman. When Toyota was coming out with the Supra, they were kind of benchmarking it against the 718 Cayman. And I see some pros and cons between the two cars. Obviously, the big pro on this car is it's 9 grand less. It's a 3-liter turbo a bit more power, probably a little, well, more than probably, it's almost certainly faster in a straight line. There's less options, meaning you get kind of what you get for that price range, which is really nice. You know, a couple garnishes and finishes, but here I'm looking at a car with adaptive cruise control, a head-up display. It has a JBL audio system, which is fine. In the Cayman, obviously, you got to really tick on everything's a la carte. Just to get something like Sports Chrono, which gives you launch control and whatnot, you're dropping, you know, a few grand there, and before you know it, easily getting close to 80 grand even on a base Cayman once you're loaded up, and now that's suddenly a $25,000 price difference. So that's all in favor of this car. Now, what's in favor of the Porsche? It's a Porsche, right? So even higher build quality. It's even more of a scalpel, you know, it's like a precision tool, and it's more balanced. It's mid-engine, you know, this is almost mid-engine, like the engine's pretty far back. It's behind the front axle, you know, front mid-engine, but that is truly a mid-engine car, so balanced, even lighter than this car. And that's about 3,000 or 3,100 pounds. This is 3,300 pounds, but this is able to do the quarter mile at 117 miles an hour in 12.1 seconds, which is pretty much F80 numbers. Super solid. You're getting close to 120 miles an hour trap speed in the quarter mile on a stock 6-cylinder motor. People are getting these up to 550 horsepower at the crank, no problem, with just ECU tunes and like maybe one piece of hardware. So the car has a tremendous amount of potential to be taken to even another level. And that kind of brings me to one of the main kind of points I want to make about the Supra, right? It's the fact that they've used the Supra nameplate. It's a lot to live up to because in 1998, they nixed the Supra, and for over 20 years, you couldn't buy a Supra. In the interim, films like Fast and Furious came out and kind of made that Mark IV Supra into an icon, so much so that today finding a Mark IV Turbo Supra is not super easy to do under $100,000. But in the same breath, there was a lot for this car to live up to when it came out, and this car's two main competitors back in the 90s were the Acura NSX and the Nissan GTR, and they were all very equivalent, all within, you know, a stone's throw of horsepower and relative performance. And now we're talking about, I mean, the NSX is kind of an irrelevant car in my eyes, but a car with around 600 horsepower. The GTR certainly has about that amount of horsepower and is still very relevant, the R35 that is, albeit a little bit long in tooth by now. Those cars have really ascended in the last 20 some odd years, and they come out with the Supra here initially last year with 335 horsepower, which is only about 15 horsepower more than that car had in 1998. So it just didn't feel like it was the natural successor to the Supra. Now, with that said, the nameplate really is the one big downside of this car. You know, if this had just been some sort of Toyota BMW collab that had come out, we'll give it a random new name, or even, I'm not gonna say Celica, but you had attached it to a little bit more of a mid-level sporty coupe nameplate, I think this would be even more revered than it is. And unfortunately, a lot of that hate comes from both the BMW collab, which I don't understand because BMW does make some pretty solid sports coupes, but also more or less because the numbers just don't stack up to what the Supra really was. Doing the quarter mile in almost under 12 seconds stock, right? Part of that's due to having some pretty solid Pilot Super Sport tires here, 255 in the front, 275 in the rear, both 19 inches. Now that I've mentioned that, the one other thing I really do want to get into is what this car's competition today is. But before I do, I gotta hit you guys with a little tall boy test. So let's see how this little tiny Supra does. I want to discuss how this car compares to the BMW M2. Now, there's a kind of method behind my madness here. Both cars are within a similar price range. Sure, these are more or less in the mid-50s, especially now that those crazy dealer ADMs, the markups are no longer really a thing. And the M2s are more or less in the low 60s to mid-60s, so a little pricier than these, the comps in particular. But there are a lot of people out there who, for around 50, 55 grand, would be considering maybe a used M2, OG M2, M2 comp, one of these. And they all are technically BMWs, smaller chassis, and similar power output. being very technical, even their Nürburgring times are all within the same range. This is actually a few tenths of a second faster than the comp. So that kind of gets me thinking, well, you're telling me this does about the same, if not a faster ring time than a M2 comp? Well, maybe you should get one of these over an M2 comp. Well, I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, where personally, one of the biggest advantages of the M2 comp is you have back seats, you have even larger trunk. Obviously this hatchback is cool, but it's not that large, and this car just is not going to be as practical as an M2 comp would be, or any M2 for that matter would be. On top of that, the M2 is a real proper M car, where this is kind of more of an M performance equivalent vehicle. So there are a couple reasons why an M2 comp should still be, on your radar. But there's one really big reason, and that's the fact that you can get the M2 OG or comp, even CS, with a manual, 6-speed manual, and you cannot get this. You can only get this, in fact, in a ZF 8-speed. It's a fantastic transmission. It's, for the most part, yet to fail me or disappoint me, but it's more that, one, the lack of options sucks, but more or less it's the fact that this is a real enthusiast car, and this is the exact kind of car with this size, with this relative balance, with this power output that you'd effectively want in a manual transmission to really be even more engaged with the car. And the fact that these Supras up until this point, the Mark IVs, the Mark IIIs, they all came with a manual. So it's a little bit of a departure, first of all, from the lineage, but also just a disappointment for those who maybe want a manual, fun, sporty car and are then either going to have to go down the line to, say, an 86, or then way up the line to, higher end sports cars, say 911s, or have to just jump over to BMW. The natural progression there is just go to an M2, go to an M3. It's a bit of a shame, and it's like one of the biggest downsides of this car aside from the nameplate. But I want to wrap the video up with some highlights and some strong points of this car. The first one, the looks. I like how this car looks. I think it's a nice combination of retro and, futuristic. I like how the headlights kind of take a little bit from that Mark IV Supra. The rear end is aggressive and sporty. Obviously, it's a smaller car, but it's certainly a more appealing car to me than, say, a 370Z is. And on that note, I love the side profile, and I like the general presence of the car. What I don't like are all the fake vents. You have some on the side of the hood. You have a massive one here by the rear part of the door on either side, and you even have a couple in the front below the headlights. And fake vents are always kind of no bueno in my eyes. There's this whole kind of notion that Toyota is aware that they have these fake vents, and tuning companies can get rid of them, and even Toyota does some of their own bespoke projects. I've seen them do a Targa style Supra, a wide body Supra. They've done some cool stuff on their own, and obviously again the aftermarket exists, wide body kits, the guys like Stradman and all those guys have done some cool stuff. But it's a bit disappointing to see all the fake vents. Other than that, the looks are nice. The seating position is fantastic. I love how I'm sitting in this car. I'm jealous of the seating position. I think it's better than most cars I've driven, in fact. The visibility is pretty good too. You have a pretty low sloping roofline, but still you have good side view mirrors, a good rear view mirror, a large enough rear window where you kind of can see all around the car. I don't find myself freaking out about my visibility, which is good, and that really complements the overall driving experience and the seating position in that regard too. If you're over maybe 6'2" or 6'3", you might not love it. I'm just under 6'2", and I think this is perfect. But overall, what I'm really trying to say and what I'm trying to really express is that the big advantage of the Supra is that it's a small, light, exciting sports car for a decently reasonable price point, with the potential to be taken even a notch further with some tuning, with some personal modifications and whatnot. The downside is it not only lacks a manual transmission, it kind of fails to live up to all the Supra hype, to the nameplate, especially of that Mark IV Supra of about 20 plus years ago. But all in all, I'm ultimately pleasantly surprised. It does make me want to get behind the wheel of the current gen Z4 M40i. I'm not a big fan of convertibles, but I've heard from a couple slightly more experienced people in the space that it drives even better than this does. So I want to experience that. I've definitely left with a good taste in my mouth and with the belief that Toyota/BMW hasn't completely failed us in regards to delivering a fun, sporty driving experience with a pretty strong motor and solid handling capabilities. Oh, locking it up right there over the bump. And on that note, guys, if you've enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. New videos are dropping every single week. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys want to see. As always, this is Rio. Peace.